There's a few foundational skills in cybersecurity, and scripting is one of those skills for various reasons, right? So in cybersecurity, sometimes you find yourself doing repetitive tasks. Whenever I teach people programming, one of the first things I tell them is that programmers are inherently lazy. If it's worth doing 2 times, it's worth writing code for. And so we try to be lazy because A, we don't want to do the work plus, but B, we also want to make sure that we can replicate it every time that we do it.
I have the honor of bringing on Josh Rykowski, founder of RunCode, the programming competition platform I've talked about in a previous video. He studied electrical engineering in college, has a master's degree focusing on multi-robot systems from Rice University, and is currently an adjunct professor for information security at a local university, and has taught Python programming to hundreds of students over the years. In this video, we talk about RunCode and the importance of scripting for cybersecurity, some of his personal views on cyber education, and advice for students in the field of cybersecurity. So Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, really look forward to talking about RunCode today.
So let's start off. Like, what is RunCode?
A couple years back, some friends and I got together and figured out, like, hey, we want to run a programming competition. So we've tried to figure out a plan to write some scripts that would automatically grade people's submissions. I went away for a work trip for a couple weeks, and the guy who was working all the infrastructure in the back end, but he presents to me as this fully kind of fleshed out website with a submission process, and it gets pulled into a back end, and then it gets run, and the output gets checked and then saved and scored and providing feedback. I wanted to figure out a way to provide programming competitions easily to large numbers of folks. Kind of since that point, we've tried to figure out, how do we make programming and scripting more approachable to folks who are either just starting out, or they want to try to branch into a new language, or they're learning to master the language that they're already comfortable in. So you've got your ACM, your Association of Computing Machinery kind of programming challenges, which are interesting, and they have some unique problems and challenges, but they're very algorithmically focused and almost arbitrary in nature in what they're looking for, and they're difficult problems. If you've ever seen them, they're hard to kind of wrap your mind around unless you've been studying in computer science. So we can try to start to kind of entice a broad swath of folks, ones who are starting out, ones that, are basically, still learning, and then ones that maybe just need to master some other techniques in the language, because there are lots of other sites out there that kind of do what we do in terms of providing, programming problems, scripting problems. So what we try to do is kind of leverage our experience and our background in cybersecurity and try to write focused questions, kind of tie them back to the challenges they'll see on the day-to-day jobs. So for instance, log parsing always comes back time and time again in various forms on our site. But we try to write across the easy, intermediate, and hard difficulties, but then we also write them against what we think are real-world problems.
What are programming competitions, and why do you pick the competition rather than maybe a kind of boot camp style, tutorial style series like all those sites out there for teaching programming?
Right. So we went the competition route because, at the end of the day, what we realize is everyone loves fake internet points, right? Everyone loves to be on the top of a leaderboard. Everyone loves to see, hey, I'm 10 points away from being number one, so let me just work on this a little harder. But that only works well if you add the added pressure of a timed competition, right? So make it only available for 8 hours or 16 hours. That's why we went that route. And plus, it gave us a chance to start to kind of assess the folks that were in the competition.
How I understand RunCode is that you have a series of programming challenges, such as parse this log file and spit back and modified output. You can code up any type of program, whether it's a script like Bash or Python, or even using C++ to compile a program, and you guys will run it on your end and check to see if the output matches, and then you get points based off of the difficulty of that challenge.
So exactly, that is correct. So one of the unique aspects of our site is we essentially do remote code execution, right? We allow you to run your code on our hardware. So an individual looks at the problem, they write their code locally, then they submit the file and not the output of their code. So they submit their file to us. We essentially copy it over to our backend, and then inside the backend, it's pulled into a Docker container, but it's run locally on the backend in a Docker container. And then when it's done, it spits the output out, and we check that output against the expected output. And then if it matches, we give points or based on the difficulty of the problem.
When you said remote code execution, I was just thinking, wow, like recipe for disaster. And totally sure people have, tried all sorts of things. What ended up happening to those people? Did you guys try to do anything about it, or what recourses did you have?
Well, I mean, the best part about it is, we've instrumented our back end to the point where we control every aspect of it. We keep eyes on, make sure there's no funny business going on, people trying to exfil data, which has happened a couple times. They try, but they invariably fail. But we see all the different pieces and we try to tighten it up as much as possible. So when we do see it, the first thing is, we chuckle at it. We're like, hey, we've already seen this before, so good luck on them. Or it's something new, so we're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then of course we'll reach out to the individual, or try to reach out to the individual, say, hey, please stop. We don't try to hit them with the band hammer right away, but we just ask them to not do that. And if they continue, then yeah, they get the band hammer and they're not allowed back on the site. And we try to make it as enticing and inviting as possible. And we do understand that some of the challenges that we do have are red team in nature, pen testing, exploitation. And so we understand that sometimes people can kind of run away with that and think, oh, maybe I'm supposed to get access to the Docker and just pull the answer out of that.
Can you talk about some of the in-person competitions that maybe you've hosted before?
Yeah, so this is one of the things we did initially when we were first figuring out run code and trying to find out what worked. So we ran in-person competitions. Most of them were run at the local university, kind of open to as many people as possible. I kind of like the in-person competitions because if I see someone struggling on the site, I can then just walk right over to them and look at their code and say, hey, what you got going on? And then have that quick conversation and point in the right direction. Also, in terms of the pressure, I think we ran them for a single day, 8 hours. And so people were just focused on coding from start to finish. And so it added a little more intensity to it as well. And plus, you could see all of your competitors. Like if you wanted to go look someone like across your keyboard or across your monitor at them, you can look at them and put a face to the person who's in front of you or behind you on the scoreboard.
Got it. So specifically, this competition, it's not like a one-time deal or a scheduled thing. It's kind of an ongoing programming challenges that you can participate at any time, right?
Yeah, so we actually have 2 iterations. So each year we run an annual competition. In fact, we're getting ready for we're ramping up for our next one, 6th through 9 November. And so we hold the annual competition, which is fresh challenges. We kick off on afternoon of a Friday, and we usually end Monday morning. It's open to all, right? People who are on the site already, they compete so they can get a chance to look at new problems and new ways to attack those problems. Now, contrast that with our perpetual site, right? So runcode.ninja is the site we maintain year-round all the time, and it has all the challenges we've ever written for all the different competitions on that site. So whenever we run a competition, we pull the challenges off the comp site and then slowly roll them into the persistent site. And I think at this point, we're well over 180 challenges on the site, across easy, intermediate, and hard, across different avenues. We've got reverse engineering, we've got some exploitation, we've got web, bunch of socket challenges, text parsing, you name it, it's on there.
Wow. So are you or people on your team the people who contribute to these challenges?
Yeah, so we started off with just 3 of us because we found like maintaining the server and maintaining all of those accesses, is costing us money. So we stood up as a nonprofit and we were able to pull in some sponsors to help defray some of that cost. But in terms of the development, it's all volunteer. Right now, we've got a team of 11 folks who write challenges across the year, and they devote their time to maintain the infrastructure, to develop challenges, to test any of the new features. So yes, all the challenges are written in-house by our 11 developers.
So what makes run code different, like worth somebody's time? Let's say you have a bunch of kids or you're in college and you're really busy. You only have maybe an hour or 2 each day to actually study and practice coding.
Yeah.
Why run code and why not Coursera or Udemy?
So, and of course, I'm coming from a very biased perspective because I love run code, passion of mine. I love everything about it. For me, what it really comes down to is we try to make ourselves available to anyone who's on the site, right? So anytime you sign up for an account on RunCode, you also get an invitation to our Slack channel. We have a Slack channel stood up that folks can hop in. We encourage folks that, hey, the admins are available. So anytime you work on a problem on RunCode, you can actually go to the Slack channel and reach out directly with particular questions and just say, hey, I'm trying to solve this. Doesn't look like it's working right. Can you give me some pointers? And then we get that dialogue. We really try to build a little bit of a community up around it. And if the admins aren't available, you can reach out in the general channel and say, hey, I'm working on this challenge. Does anyone have any pointers? And so anyone in there can reach out or at least provide some points and tips to that individual. So that's one selling aspect of it, is the fact that we've got a little bit of a community, and if you need help, you can just reach out and get some form of help or a push in the right direction. The second is I really feel the way we write the challenges, we try to have that real world application approach. People can realize that when they're just starting out, with the little bit I know about Python, or insert X language here, I can solve these types of problems. And so instead of just understanding like, okay, I'm going to write a problem that opens a file, reads the content, and then prints something out. And so it kind of gives that tie back into that real world application. They start to see the benefits and the usefulness of the little bit or the lot of the language that they know at that time.
What are some of the success stories you've seen from programming competitions, specifically for Run Code? Some newbie just totally trying to start out in the field and they start practicing. What happened to them after maybe a few months of working on Run Code?
I've seen people who come to a competition, they compete, and then they end up in the top 10 or top 5 or whatever. And then of course, there could possibly have been some sort of recruiter there handing off business cards like, hey, if you need a job, come talk to us, right? We've seen you throw some code down. We know you've got the skill set, so come work at us. Also, we have stories in terms of like the devs on our side have leveraged the fact that they write code and they maintain the infrastructure to kind of position themselves and work those into different angles and job opportunities as well. The site ends up being a means for people to show and validate that they have a particular skill set. It's something where they can point to and say, hey, instead of doing that in-person interview, here's my foot in the door. Take a look at my score on Run Code.
So let's expand that just a little bit more. Your background is in kind of defensive cybersecurity, as I understand. Yeah. So what types of maybe day-to-day tasks for defensive cybersecurity would you see requiring scripting and like maybe a challenge that corresponds to that type of task?
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes if you're scraping signatures, maybe you don't get your signatures in the right format, right? They're coming from different areas or different avenues. You want to put them into a different tool. That's really kind of where I see scripting. It's kind of a bridging between the output of one particular tool or repository of data, and you want to format it so it can be put into another one. So I've seen folks be able to scrape signatures and then and put them in the right format to be ingested into some other mechanism for them to be used later. So that's an easy one right there for the defense.
So what about for something like reverse engineering or one of the other many categories on the site?
Sure. If you're doing, say, dynamic analysis, you can write some quick scripts to see what happens to the file system before and after you run that particular executable. But it allows you to write your own code to do that. I understand there are tools out there that'll do that for you, but by writing your own code to do that, you can then maybe possibly tie that into deeper analysis. Now, in terms of reverse engineering, again, you can start to pull out relevant chunks of that file, right? Given some known header information or some known points or particular things you're looking for, you can then use your script to look at the contents of the file, try to find those out, and just kind of carve out sections for more detailed analysis later.
Do you think it's important for people to learn programming or specifically scripting in the field of cybersecurity?
That is definitely a resounding yes. At the end of the day, I feel like there's a few foundational skills in cybersecurity, and scripting is one of those skills for various reasons, right? In cybersecurity, sometimes you find yourself doing, repetitive tasks. And if you find yourself doing something more than once, at that point, you should be able to sit down and write some quick code, maybe some Python to automate that task for you. So that way it frees up your time to learn something new or to continue on in your job. It also helps you understand the tools you're using, right? So if you understand how to write code and how code kind of works in the workflow, and you can start looking at the internals of the tool and manipulating it to suit your purposes and tailoring it to your environment or your particular problem set.
So for people who don't know how to code, what are some paths you've seen them take? Just go on to open a book or jump on some documentation online, join a code academy? And what are the successes or failures of doing that?
There are definitely multiple paths to start to learn the script. There are definitely a number of websites out there that are intros to Python, intros to Golang, intros to whatever language you want. You can hop on YouTube and start looking up tutorials, Udemy, Coursera. I've seen a lot of folks just go and buy an intro to programming course there and sit down and nug through it. At the end of the day, I encourage folks to try to find the method that works best for them. Personally, I like to read about the task. I like to see maybe a screenshot or two, some steps, and let me go do it. Other folks like the YouTube tutorial where they can actually see it in real time, see it flow, and see the workflow happen. So, one thing I've learned in dealing with a lot of folks on the site is just kind of pointing them to a number of resources, web page tutorials, YouTube tutorials, Udemy, Coursera, and kind of tell them like, hey, check all of them out, at least, what you can, and find out what works best for you. Some folks are so new in the learning process that they don't understand that there's, different ways to learn.
For sure. So I am a complete newbie. I have, a very limited understanding of how to use Kali Linux or, run tools other people have made. How do I begin?
So for me, it was always just trying it out. I've never been afraid to sit down, try to do something initially myself. So what I found that works best for a lot of folks is having a mentor, or at least someone or some group of people that they can reach back to and say, hey, I'm trying this didn't work for me. Can someone point me in the right direction? However, I understand that that's hard because in our domain, we tend to have, more introverts than extroverts. And so it's a little harder to meet people and to reach out and find mentors. So again, back to what we do on Run Code is by having that Slack channel there, it kind of anonymizes the person behind the computers.
Having been involved in like the computing and security field for, I think decades almost, what types of advice would you give to your younger former self, as you were learning and growing in your own journey?
Providing advice back to myself would be just to, carve out more time, but also strike the balance, right? So I think when I first got into it, it's very easy to get caught up and enamored in the learning aspect of it and start focusing your time on learning and growing as much as you can. And it's very easy to lose sight of everything else, right? You've got family, you've got friends, you've got other things to do. And then you've got this big unknown thing you're trying to, chip away at. And it's easy to lose yourself in that. And then everything else kind of, I won't say suffers, but, you're spending less time devoted to them. The advice I would give back to myself would be mindful of the balance, right? Because you're never going to get it perfect. However, just as long as you're thinking about it, you'll always be trying to right the balance.
If you were in a small town in some, middle of nowhere place and you weren't surrounded by technologists and people who had a passion for this stuff, but how do you really kind of get plugged into the people that you mentioned who can kind of help lead you the right path?
Well, I mean, if we were pre-COVID, what I would say is, try to go to the nearest information security conference, find a B-sides is close enough, go and listen to some talks because, that to me is kind of what's driving the community as well, right? Those gatherings of information security professionals coming together, sharing ideas and techniques and talks and whatnot. So that would be one. Look those conferences up on YouTube. 9 times out of 10, they'll record the talks and they'll put them out there. And so you can kind of pick and choose what talks sound, good or interesting. And if you're truly a beginner and you don't know that much about the domain, go to the talks that sound remotely familiar, right? So that way you have some sort of idea what's going to be going on in the talk. Go in there, make some notes, or listen to the talk, make some notes, and then go look up terms that are mentioned. And then that'll again have you spiral out from the talk into learning about some particular terms, and those terms will lead you into different technologies.
So what is it about cybersecurity that makes it so difficult to learn? Not just the shortage of mentors, as you described earlier, or the domain being so broad.
Right. So when people are just starting out in this domain, like you mentioned, it's definitely a broad domain. So I think one of the easier paths forward as people are just starting out is to kind of pick a subset of the domain. So some people focus on scripting and use our site. Other people focus on how do I employ sensors on a network to do some of the network security monitoring. Because what I found is when I focus on a subset or a smaller division of cybersecurity, as I deep dive into solving that for myself or figuring that out for myself, I learn other pieces of information as I go. You can't learn network security monitoring without understanding how the network works. And so then you find yourself learning about the network. And as you're doing that, then you start finding out, okay, what layer of the network do I want to learn about today? Is it layer 2? Is it layer 3? How do these devices work? And then you start finding like, okay, well, if I'm running Cisco, then the configure this way, Juniper it's another way. What you find is as you dive into that focus, you still spread out and cover more of the domain than you realize.
What resources did you follow, read, watch, listen to consistently to become better at what you're doing now?
First and foremost, the best resources I've ever had are the people around me, people that I can ask questions of and say, hey, I just saw this, this doesn't make sense to me, and they can point me in a different direction. One of the other things I did early on is set up a Twitter account and then just followed a bunch of InfoSec people. And that became some standard reading. It still allows me to kind of keep my finger on, what's new out there. Someone actually pointed me in that direction early on and told me to set up that Twitter and follow some folks. And then what you do is you find you'll branch out and follow others. And it becomes a good, relevant, quick news source to kind of take a look at.
That makes a lot of sense because, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of what we do can be automated.
Yeah.
And at first, when you're trying to come up with a proof of concept or try something out, you may do it manually, but the best security practitioners are lazy, and being able to automate gets you there.
That's funny because whenever I teach people programming, one of the first things I tell them is that programmers are inherently lazy. If it's worth doing 2 times, it's worth writing code for. And so we try to be lazy because A, we don't want to do the work but B, we also want to make sure that we can replicate it every time that we do it.
What are some of the character qualities that differentiate people who are successful and not so successful, maybe on the Runcode platform, or even in general for cybersecurity?
In terms of kind of the characteristics I've seen of people who are successful, for me personally, I think it's just passion for the domain. It's folks who want to understand as much as possible as they can about systems. So how do we understand them? How do we find the friction points in them? And how do we possibly break them? And the best way to do that is with passion, right? The passion drives you down the path of learning everything you can about a set technology or a particular system. And then it drives you just to learn more. So the passion kind of also ties in with the curiosity piece. So oftentimes I find people asking this domain, they ask the why. Well, this system does X. Well, why is it doing X? Then they start deep diving into it, and then they dive down and find out that maybe there's an issue somewhere that they're able to exploit to gain access or to manipulate data.
So you may have heard about this huge shortage of cybersecurity talent, everything from government to industry and just across all the different sectors. What are some other things you think we could be doing to make it more accessible and to fill that talent gap?
So for me personally, it's been a small crusade, if you will, of mine to push STEM topics down into lower grade levels at the high school, junior high, middle school, and elementary level, right? So a lot of folks don't get exposed to, say, computers, computer science, or networking technologies or computers in terms of cybersecurity until later. And so by that time, it's already cemented in their mind that, hey, I'm going to be good at computers, or I'm not, or I didn't even know that this was a career path for me. Yeah, I really like the Cyber Patriot program because they pushed a lot of this down into the middle school and high schools, building teams that understand how to secure computers, and they run competitions to reinforce that. We have a lot of open vacancies, across the board. And, if you go with what I'm proposing, it's still going to take years for that to catch up. Unfortunately, I think a lot of companies over require on their positions. So if you look at some of the calls for, the open requirements for open positions, for an intro position, they still want 5 years of, network security monitoring or anything like that. So if you're just starting out and you're like, hey, I understand how to, use Security Onion or Rock NSM, but you look at a job opening like that and you automatically rule yourself out because you're like, I don't have 5 years of NSM, or maybe you do running it at home, but again, they don't clarify if they just say 5 years of experience. So, you would infer that that's enterprise experience or, corporate experience. Also, just understanding that at the end of the day, oftentimes we can build the workforce by taking the time to bring on, younger untrained folks who are willing to do the work. If you pair them up with a mentor on the job, it takes away some time, but that's kind of shepherding the next generation of cybersecurity professionals by giving up a little bit of time. So I think that would help close the gap.
Got it. So just on the part of companies to be more willing to accept people and train them and spend the resources to invest in people.
For me personally, I would rather bring on someone who wants to be there rather than someone who maybe has the experience, but is just looking at it like a paycheck.
What types of training resources and environments should cyber teams or companies be turning towards to try to develop and invest in their staff? Is it more certifications, private training sessions, like an internal curriculum?
I would say some sort of training range that allows folks to just get on there and say, okay, today I'm going to focus on host analysis, or I'm going to start looking at the different hosts on the training network and see what's out there, what's running, take stock of the systems on the network. Certifications, again, I think that's definitely a polarizing topic. You've got one camp that swears by them because you can create a lot of great information, and it kind of shows you a base level of knowledge. But then there's the other half that don't believe in certifications because they believe they shouldn't have to take a test or shouldn't have to highlight that or pay someone to sit through a class. So me personally, I like to talk to folks and figure out where their skill level lies, right? Just a quick chat, you can start to figure out how much people know on certain topics. However, some companies' process is a little more involved, and the certification ends up being first screening criteria. But me personally, if you got certs, great. If you have the knowledge, again, great, because I would like to take the time to kind of figure out where your knowledge is and then align you against that.
Yeah, you might wonder, hey, this guy has all these certs, but this other guy can actually code solutions to problems we're dealing with. He seems much more valuable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're certified in scripting, what does that really tell me? And it would actually cause me to go back and look into, okay, what was the certification process, right? Did you have to write code to get that certification, or was it simply reviewing code and making comments? I'd rather have someone who can write code and be able to, execute and understand it from that point of view than someone who can just read it at that point.
What are some of the things that maybe the leaders, managers in these organizations can do? Just maybe be better at managing technical talent?
To lead technical folks, you have to be technical yourself, right? And that's for two primary reasons. If you're technical, then you'll understand exactly it is what you're asking of the people who are working for you. And then you also understand the time and the resources required to in place the technologies. So if you're not technical, you're still making those asks, but you don't understand the impacts on the human level and on the technology level across those two pieces. But if you are a technical leader or manager yourself, you have a better knowledge of how to employ your people and your technology. And so for me, I would definitely try to push leaders to be technical. I know it's hard because the more technical you are, the more you want to do, right? But when you're in that leadership position or that manager position, you're looking across a larger set of folks and a larger set of projects. You're doing less hands-on, but you're getting more accomplished.
When it comes to a lot of people who are very skilled, near experts in this field, there can be a lot of personalities that come out. What is some of your experiences in dealing with that?
Dealing with personalities in this domain is a unique challenge because if you go back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, is I look for people with passion within the domain. The side effect of finding people with passion in this domain is you find people who also have, I won't say larger personalities, but they have ideas that they want to accomplish, which is great if you have one. But if you have two, and if those two are going in the same direction, that's great. If they're going this way, it doesn't work out so well. Personally, with dealing with those personalities, I've always looked at that as building a coalition of the willing, trying to build a shared understanding of where we want to go with the team. So as long as I have buy-in, we're off and running. And it's worked well for our team. We all wanted to, provide this service to the community free of charge. And as we've grown the team, we've been very selective of the folks we've, invited onto the team, ensured that, they understand that because we're a nonprofit and because we bring in just enough money to cover, server costs and prizes for the competitions, that we don't take a salary out of that. Everyone understands that when you do come on board for Runcode, that's the expectation. We'll get some challenges out of you. You'll participate on the site, and then we'll continue to churn.
It's not just being an expert or being very skilled at your craft, but there's also a large degree of intellectual humility involved as well. And having that mentor or people around you who are better than you, and you see that they themselves are very humble about their skills and progression. I think that could be very powerful for someone who's new.
So if you're learning in a vacuum, it's very easy to learn something, apply it, see that it works, and you start thinking like, hey, I can do more and more. But if you have that mentor aspect to kind of ground you a little bit, because people do kind of run away with that sometimes in terms of thinking of okay, I'm the best that I know of. Well, it's easy to be the best if the only person you know in that domain is yourself. That's why I like the competition, and that's why for me personally, competing in capture the flag events helps me realize all the time that like there are people that are wicked good out there. I like to surround myself with those people because I learn from them. So that's having that humility to approach the mentor shows you that you still have a lot to learn and you can still grow in the domain.
What are some things that you do in your free time apart from cybersecurity, run code, and tech and stuff? Maybe hobbies. I understand you're into kind of retro games.
That is 100% correct, right? So one of the other pieces of advice I get to give to people who are getting into the domain is try to find yourself a hobby outside of the domain, right? Try to find something that'll give you something to do and give you a win outside. Because some days you're going to have those days where your code doesn't work right, the tools aren't working right, you're not finding out what you need to find out. And so sometimes you need an easy win. So that's where your hobby comes in. Or it gives you a chance to just to shut your brain off and to work on it. So for me personally, I love retro gaming. And so, old game systems, Nintendo, Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision, I collect them, I work on them, I revive them. Arcade games, I do a lot of work refurbishing them. And the fun part about it is I enjoy fixing them and handing them off to someone else more than I enjoy playing them, because it's kind of like reviving that old 80s technology and getting that little win with a quick solder or a replacement of a chip.
I see that you have something right behind you. What arcade is that?
So that's my Donkey Kong arcade. That's actually what I consider my crown jewel, because it was the very first game I ever worked on and I ever restored and got running again. So that one had some issues with the monitor. So I had to replace all the capacitors in the board on the monitor. Learned some lessons there for sure. Monitors are dangerous. What they tell you is you need to discharge it because it holds about 20,000 volts after you turn it off. I thought I discharged it. I didn't. And they also tell you to use plastic screwdrivers. I did not. Because, the little hubris, because I was just starting out. I'm like, I don't need plastic screwdrivers. Yeah, that one got me pretty good. After I could open my eyes again, I could smell the ozone in the room because it zapped me pretty good. It was fun.
Well, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show. So where can other people find you?
So a couple of different places. So if you do sign up for runcode.ninja, you'll get that invite to the Slack channel. RYKO212 is my username on there. You can also find me on Twitter, at RYKO212. It's pretty standard. Or if people wanted to reach out to me directly, Ryko212 at runcode.ninja email. So again, multiple ways to kind of reach out to me. And I'm open to answer questions about the site, cybersecurity, anything like that. So if folks have questions, they can definitely send them my way.
Well, maybe love to do a programming sessions with you, one of these days, and maybe get a series of these run code programming challenges kicked off for people to see what it's all about.
No, that'd be awesome. I'd like to share the site with folks.
Thanks so much again for coming on, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.